Sudan's history stretches back to ancient times, with the region serving as a crucial bridge between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean world. The area along the Nile River, known as Nubia, became home to some of Africa's most sophisticated early civilizations. The Kingdom of Kush emerged around 1070 BCE, establishing its capital at Napata near the Fourth Cataract of the Nile. The Kushites developed a powerful civilization that rivaled ancient Egypt, adopting Egyptian religious practices, hieroglyphic writing, and architectural styles while maintaining distinct cultural elements. Between 760 and 656 BCE, Kushite pharaohs actually ruled Egypt as the 25th dynasty, known as the Black Pharaohs, controlling territory from modern-day Khartoum to the Mediterranean. After losing control of Egypt to Assyrian invasions, the Kushite kingdom relocated its capital south to Mera around 590 BCE. The Meroitic period represented the height of Sudanese ancient civilization. Meru became a major center of iron production, trade, and learning. The Meroites developed their own writing system, Meroitic script, and maintained extensive trade networks reaching India, China, and the Ramang Empire. The kingdom's wealth came from gold mining, iron working, and control of trade routes connecting Africa with the Mediterranean and Red Sea regions. By the 6th century CE, 3 Christian kingdoms had emerged: Nobasha in the north, Makuria in the center, and Alodia in the south. The decline of Meru coincided with the rise of Christianity in the region. The kingdoms maintained diplomatic relations with Byzantine Constantinople and developed unique forms of Christianity that blended traditional beliefs with Christian theology. The kingdoms negotiated the Back Treaty, establishing peaceful relations and tribute payments to Muslim Egypt while maintaining autonomy. Increasing pressure from Arab tribes and internal conflicts weakened the Christian kingdoms. Makuria fell to Muslim forces in 1323, while Alodia persisted until the early 16th century. Established around 1504, the Sultanate controlled much of central and eastern Sudan from its capital at Sennar, marked the beginning of Islamic dominance in Sudan. These kingdoms maintained independence and Christian identity for nearly 1,000 years. The Kingdom of Makuria became the most powerful, with its capital at Old Dongola. By the 18th century, the Sultanate declined due to succession disputes and tribal conflicts. Arab armies first invaded Nubia in 641 CE, but faced fierce resistance. By the 13th century, the Funj Sultanate, mapping the region and establishing trading posts. Founded by the Funj people in alliance with Arab tribes, Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt conquered most of northern Sudan, calling for the purification of Islam and the expulsion of foreign rulers. Capturing El Obeid in 883 and annihilating a British-led Egyptian army under William Hicks, resulting in the death of British General Charles Gordon, shocked the international community and established Mahdist control over most of Sudan. One of the most significant resistance movements in African history, his successor Khalifa Abdullahi, established the Mahdist state with Omdurman as its capital. Including the establishment of Khartoum as the administrative capital in 1830, introduction of steamships on the Nile, and construction of telegraph lines. The state faced numerous challenges: economic difficulties due to disrupted trade, conflicts with neighboring powers, internal tribal disputes, and natural disasters including famines and epidemics. Built railways connecting Port Sudan to Khartoum and extending to other regions, developed cotton cultivation in the Gezira scheme, and created educational institutions including Gordon Memorial College. Establishing Turkish-Egyptian rule that introduced modern governmental structures but was often harsh and exploitative, representing the only period of independent Sudanese rule between the fall of the Funj Sultanate and modern independence. tribal leaders and common people suffering under oppressive taxation and foreign rule. The 1924 revolt, though unsuccessful, demonstrated growing opposition to colonial rule. Led by General Herbert Kitchener, reconquered Sudan in 1896 to 1898, culminating in the Battle of Omdurman, where modern weapons decimated Mahdist forces. The Mahdist movement profoundly shaped Sudanese national consciousness and demonstrated the possibility of successful resistance against foreign domination, creating a unique colonial arrangement where Britain and Egypt nominally shared authority over Sudan, though Britain exercised effective control. The Sultanate operated through a feudal system with considerable provincial autonomy. Regional inequalities became pronounced, with northern areas receiving disproportionate investment. This period saw gradual Islamization of Sudanese society, while many local customs persisted. Trade flourished, with Sennar becoming a major commercial center controlling gold mines and trade networks, working through traditional leaders while introducing modern governance structures and urban centers. However, known as Ansar, employed guerrilla tactics and religious motivation to defeat better-equipped Turkish-Egyptian armies. In 1821, the period saw some modernization efforts. European explorers and missionaries also began arriving. Growing resentment against Turkish-Egyptian rule culminated in the Mahdist Revolution. The discovery of oil in southern Sudan in the late 1970s added new dimensions to regional tensions. Muhammad Ahmad ibn Abdallah proclaimed himself the Mahdi in 1881. The Mahdi attracted followers from diverse backgrounds, religious scholars. His movement combined religious fervor with nationalist sentiment and social grievances. The Mahdist forces, the revolution achieved stunning successes. The siege and capture of Khartoum in 1885, following the Mahdi's death in 1885, the Khalifa attempted to create a centralized Islamic state based on strict interpretation of Islamic law. However, the Mahdist state lasted 13 years despite its ultimate defeat. British and Egyptian forces. The Anglo-Egyptian Condominium was established in 1899. The Condominium period brought significant changes to Sudanese society. The British established modern administrative structures. Colonial policy emphasized indirect rule in many areas. The British also implemented a policy of separating northern and southern Sudan, treating the south as distinct from the Arabic Islamic north and limiting interaction between the regions. Economic development focused on agricultural exports, particularly cotton, which became Sudan's primary export crop. The Gezira scheme, established in the 1920s, created one of the world's largest irrigation projects and transformed Sudan into a major cotton producer. However, economic benefits primarily flowed to British and Egyptian interests rather than Sudanese populations. Nationalist sentiment gradually emerged, particularly among educated urban elites. Political organizations began forming in the 1940s, with two major parties emerging: the Ummah Party, associated with Mahdist traditions, and the National Unionist Party, favoring union with Egypt. Sudan achieved independence on January 1, 1956, amid unresolved tensions between different political factions and regions. The new state inherited significant challenges: underdeveloped economy dependent on agricultural exports, inadequate infrastructure, ethnic and religious diversity, and the unresolved status of southern Sudan. The first parliament was dominated by northern Arabic-speaking Muslims, with minimal representation from the south. This imbalance contributed to the outbreak of the First Sudanese Civil War in 1955, even before independence, as southern military units mutinied against northern domination. Parliamentary democracy proved fragile, with governments frequently changing due to political fragmentation. Major political parties included the Ummah Party and the National Unionist Party, later reorganized as the Democratic Unionist Party. Economic challenges persisted, with Sudan struggling to diversify beyond cotton exports. The southern conflict intensified as the Nyanya rebel movement fought for autonomy, creating conditions for military intervention. Colonel Jafar Nimeiri seized power in a bloodless coup on May 25, 1969, establishing a revolutionary command council and suspending political parties. Initially aligned with leftist and communist forces, Nimeiri promised social revolution and economic development. Early policies included nationalization of foreign businesses, land reforms, and expansion of state control over the economy. The government also pursued closer relations with the Soviet Union and Eastern European countries while implementing socialist-inspired policies. However, Nimeiri's political orientation shifted dramatically following a failed communist coup attempt in 1971. He purged leftist elements from government, executed communist leaders, and gradually moved toward Western alignment and market-oriented policies. The most significant achievement of Nimeiri's rule was the 1972 Addis Ababa Agreement, which ended the First Civil War by granting Southern Sudan regional autonomy. The agreement created the Southern Sudan Autonomous Region with its own regional government, though real power remained centralized in Khartoum. Economic policies during the 1970s emphasized large-scale development projects financed by oil revenues and foreign loans. However, these projects often proved economically unviable, contributing to mounting debt and inflation. Nimeiri's later years were marked by increasing authoritarianism and Islamic orientation. In 1983, he abrogated the Addis Ababa Agreement, dividing the South into 3 regions and transferring oil-producing areas to northern control. Most controversially, he implemented Islamic Sharia law throughout Sudan, including the non-Muslim South. These policies triggered the Second Sudanese Civil War in 1983 when Colonel John Garang formed the Sudan People's Liberation Army. The SPLA initially fought for a unified, secular Sudan but later evolved toward supporting southern independence. Economic collapse, drought, famine, and civil war created humanitarian crises that overwhelmed government capacity. Popular protests, supported by trade unions and professional associations, culminated in Nimeiri's overthrow in April 1985. A transitional military council led by General Abdul Rahman Sewar al-Dahab handed power to civilian government following 1986 elections. Sadiq al-Mahdi became prime minister, leading a coalition government that struggled with the ongoing civil war, economic crisis, and political fragmentation. The democratic government proved unable to resolve fundamental challenges. Peace negotiations with the SPLA made little progress, the economy continued deteriorating, and political parties remained divided. On June 30, 1989, Brigadier Omar al-Bashir seized power in a military coup backed by the National Islamic Front. The new regime suspended political parties and imposed strict Islamic policies, transforming Sudan into an Islamic state and hosting international Islamist movements. The civil war intensified under Bashir's rule, with both sides committing serious human rights violations. The conflict expanded beyond the south to include eastern Sudan, the Nubia Mountains, and Blue Nile regions. International isolation increased following Sudan's support for Iraq during the Gulf War and its alleged connections to international terrorism. Economic conditions worsened due to war costs, international sanctions, and mismanagement. Inflation soared, basic services collapsed in many areas, and millions became internally displaced. The government's oil revenue, beginning in the late 1990s, primarily funded military operations rather than development. Bashir gradually consolidated power, sidelining Turabi in 1999 and establishing personal control over the state apparatus. Constitutional reforms in 2005 theoretically allowed for political pluralism, but real power remained concentrated in the ruling National Congress Party. International pressure, particularly from the United States, and military stalemate led to serious peace negotiations in the early 2000s. The Comprehensive Peace Agreement, signed in January 2005, established a framework for ending the North-South Civil War. The CPA created an interim government of national unity with John Garang as vice president, established autonomous government for Southern Sudan, and scheduled a referendum on Southern independence for 2011. The agreement also provided for wealth-sharing arrangements, particularly regarding oil revenues and integration of military forces. Garang's death in a helicopter crash just months after the agreement created uncertainty, but his successor Salva Kiir maintained commitment to the peace process. The interim period saw gradual implementation of CPA provisions, though tensions persisted over border demarcation, oil revenue sharing, and the status of contested areas. Simultaneously, conflict erupted in Darfur region starting in 2003. When rebel groups attacked government installations claiming marginalization and neglect. The government's response, involving militias known as Janjaweed, led to widespread atrocities that international observers characterized as genocide. The Darfur conflict attracted significant international attention, resulting in United Nations peacekeeping deployment and International Criminal Court indictments against Sudanese officials, including President Bashir in 2009 for war crimes and genocide. Despite ongoing conflicts elsewhere, the CPA held, and the Southern independence referendum proceeded as scheduled in January 2011. An overwhelming 98.83% of voters chose independence, leading to the creation of South Sudan as an independent state on July 9, 2011. Sudan's partition created new challenges alongside resolving the North-South conflict. The loss of southern oil fields eliminated approximately 75% of government revenues, causing severe economic crisis. Currency devaluation, inflation, and austerity measures sparked widespread popular discontent. Post-partition disputes with South Sudan over oil revenues, border demarcation, and citizenship rights created ongoing tensions. Conflicts in South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and Eastern Sudan continued, involving populations allied with the former southern rebels. The Darfur conflict persisted despite various peace agreements and international interventions. Humanitarian conditions remain dire in many areas, with millions requiring assistance and protection. Bashir's government attempted to address economic challenges through subsidy reforms and new revenue sources, but these measures often increased popular hardship. Civil society organizations, though restricted, maintained pressure for political reform and human rights improvements. Regional developments, including the Arab Spring, inspired increased opposition activism. Young people, professionals, and marginalized communities began organizing more effectively despite government repression. Economic crisis deepened in the late 2010s, with severe shortages of fuel, bread, and foreign currency. In December 2018, protests began in response to bread price increases but quickly evolved into nationwide demonstrations demanding Bashir's removal. The protest movement, led by the Sudanese Professionals Association and supported by diverse civil society groups, sustained momentum despite violent government crackdowns. On April 11, 2019, the military removed Bashir from power following months of demonstrations. A transitional period began with power-sharing arrangements between military and civilian forces, aiming to establish democratic governance and address Sudan's multiple crises. However, on October 25, 2021, military leaders led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan dissolved the transitional government in a coup, triggering renewed protests and international condemnation. The current situation remains fluid, with Sudanese citizens continuing to demand civilian rule while facing economic hardship, political uncertainty, and ongoing conflicts in peripheral regions. Sudan's future depends on resolving these fundamental challenges while building inclusive governance structures that can address the country's diversity and historical grievances. Throughout its long history, Sudan has demonstrated remarkable resilience and cultural richness despite facing numerous challenges. The country's strategic location, natural resources, and human capital provide foundations for future development, though realizing this potential requires addressing deep-rooted political, economic, and social issues that have persisted across different historical periods.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more engaging historical content.